It must be nice having a home track. I imagine it's like the motorsports equivalent of the bar in Cheers. A place where you can take a break from all your worries, everyone knows your name, and you've memorized every bump, curb, and camber change. Unfortunately for me, I've chosen a more nomadic life. Given the nature and goal of Lap of the World, 9 times out of 10 when I show up at a track, it's going to be my first time on that circuit. Realizing that, I've put some serious thought into developing a process for me to learn new tracks efficiently, so that when I do get on site, I can get up to speed quickly and enjoy the experience of being in a new venue, rather than stressing about what I'm doing there. However, since starting Lap of the World in earnest, I really haven't had a chance to put more than 1 or 2 techniques into practice at a time, until now. After my last trip to drive Summit Point in Maine with an S-Expo, I feel I can finally make this video demonstrating some real processes and showing actual results. So, here are my methods for learning new tracks quickly. Before we dive right in, let me frame this a little bit in the context of my thoughts and feelings that the tools and methods that I'm going to talk about in this video should be pretty universal. Anybody should be able to use them to an extent. However, my narration of the tools may make some assumptions in the language I use. Things like assuming that you have at least a little bit of on-track experience, you are able to self-analyze effectively when it comes to your own driving, and that you're at least somewhat familiar with the car or cars that you're going to be using on the track. So, with those small caveats out of the way, let's get started. Before I even register for an event, I will often get on YouTube and look for in-car video from the track in question. Searching Summit Point, Maine in this case generated a number of results, but we're going to be discerning here, because not just any video will do. I suggest looking for several things. First, perspective. Actual in-car, over-the-shoulder video trumps, in my opinion, dash cam or bumper view, because you can see driver inputs and you have the visual context of the interior of the car for track positioning reference. Second, a track map overlay with any additional data on screen is a bonus. For me, watching video is primarily about learning the layout of the track, and a map overlay showing where the car is on the track at any point really speeds up that process, especially on longer or more technical tracks. Third, credentials. Any novice these days can plunk a GoPro in their car and go and drive on a racetrack. I mean, look at me. Cameras everywhere, no idea what I'm doing. No, we're looking for a video with at least plausibly knowledgeable drivers. Prolific professional drivers like Randy Popst, Lee Keen, Billy Johnson, Mike Skeen, and some others can often be found driving street cars on many different tracks, and those videos are great resources if you can find them. You get bonus points for finding all of the above done in a car that is similar to or the same as the one you'll be driving. Now, if you drive a Miata, Corvette, or 911, this should be really simple. It's easier said than done for an old NSX. For Summit Point in particular, I was linked to a video by Samed Rizvi, apologies for pronunciation. There's a link in the description to that did a great job talking through all of the turns in a concise manner, providing sound reasoning for the lines he chose. I cross-referenced that video with Mike Skeen driving a Porsche Cayman, a car pretty similar in power and balance to a Generation 1 NSX, and without the slicks or aero on the S2K in the previous video. Make a note of that lap time, 1:26.5, and also done in 2019. Alright, whoa. Slow down there. I see you guys out there, all of the veteran instructors that are just rolling your eyes at me really hard and getting ready to warm those fingers up to obliterate me in the comments section. Why is this guy making a video about learning a track in the first place and then talking about lap times? Lap times are like the enemy of good instruction. And you're not wrong, you have a valid point. But remember that part at the beginning of the video where I said a lot of my narration is going to make some assumptions. This is one of those times. Yes, for a novice or beginning driver, someone who's just been signed off to solo, for instance, paying attention to lap time, or heaven forbid running a lap timer in the car, is a terrible plan. Uh, it's probably the fastest way to the scene of the accident, and a good way to motivate yourself to drive beyond your talent, usually with unfortunate results. However, for an experienced driver, like it or not, lap time is one of the only real objective measurements we have for improvement. So, having said that though, it does go with the assumption when we're talking about lap times that you yourself know your limits both as a driver and the limits of your vehicle. Carry on. At my first ever driving school, the first ever question an instructor asked me was, "So, do you play video games?" My answer was yes, but I also paid attention in physics, and that seemed to put us on the right foot. But the question does speak to the tendency people have to misequate virtual experience with real-world experience. There's definitely a difference, although if GT Academy is any evidence, at least some skills are definitely transferable. I have personally found that when used in appropriate context, driving games or driving sims, for those who take them seriously, can be incredibly powerful mnemonic devices for learning a track. Finding a particular track in a video game, though, isn't always simple. iRacing has many of the smaller tracks that might not see inclusion in a Gran Turismo or Forza release, but I don't have an iRacing subscription, so I had to go digging on a race department for Summit Main. I came up with an Assetto Corsa work-in-progress mod that was not perfect, but was definitely playable enough for my purposes. I paired that with an amazing NSX mod that I also found for Assetto Corsa, and took what I learned from watching videos and proceeded to apply that to driving the track in the simulation. After a few dozen laps, I was somewhere in the minute and 27 seconds range in my virtual NSX. I felt I had the layout of the track down cold and something of an idea of what competent pace should look like, if my virtual versus reality challenge at VIR was any evidence. As we transition from the virtual homework, if you want to call it that, to the practical exam on the live track, I'll bring up a quick conversation I had with some local drivers and instructors during the event. And I got curious and I just asked them, hey, what do you guys think the competency threshold lap time is for something like a stock NSX on street tires around Summit, Maine? And they kind of agreed in dry conditions, obviously a bunch of caveats and variables there, but somewhere in the minute 35 second range, if you were able to circulate comfortably at that pace, you were not lost. I think was the quote that I heard. So, with that in mind, let's get on the track and do some actual driving. Walking or riding around the track before any driving starts is the closest look you'll get at the surface, the curbs, and camber changes before actually jumping in your own car. You will notice things outside of the car or at slow speed as a passenger that you might not notice driving, possibly until after it's too late. I did not get to take advantage of this at Summit Point, but it is worth mentioning. Liz, for instance, went for a ride with a couple of instructors the evening before the event and uncovered one of Summit Maine's potential hazards. Needless to say, I had my head on a swivel in the early morning session when deer are most likely to be active. I can highly recommend taking advantage of any warm-up sessions. Chin Track Days provided a short morning session under a full course yellow specifically for people to circulate and familiarize themselves with the track. This was my first real-world look at a full lap, and I was able to mentally reconcile what I'd watched and driven virtually with what I was now driving in real life without the pressure of watching my mirrors or being in anyone's way. Full disclosure, left to my own devices, with just my virtual homework and a warm-up session to work with, my quick lap in the first dry session was somewhere in the high minute 28 second range, which is, that's well below the competency threshold defined by the locals and instructors, so yay. But let's see where we can go from there by applying a few more learning techniques in addition to just more seat time in general. Once you're fully on track with possibly a session or two under your belt, pay attention to others in your group, especially those driving similar cars. If you see someone doing something better than you, Even if you may be running similar lap times, try and follow them and emulate them where possible. NS Expo is low-hanging fruit because the majority of people on track with me had fairly similar cars. Here I point AJ, the solo NSX, by and follow him through a section where he had been fractionally catching me or gapping me every lap, although our overall lap times were pretty similar. I changed some things, and that was worth about a half second going into my next session. Depending on your run group's rules, you may even be able to arrange an entire lead-follow session with a friend or instructor. One of the last things I'll cover is also one of the best ways to improve as a driver, and that is to ride with someone better than you. As an occasional instructor myself, I often find it's easier to show than to tell, so we'll take students out in my own car and drive like I want them to drive and narrate. By the same token, when I have the chance to ride with someone clearly faster than me, I take advantage. Again, NS Expo delivers. Some trivia for those unfamiliar: the current president of the NSX Club of America happens to be one Peter Cunningham. Yes, that Peter Cunningham. Peter, as well as Nick and James Robinson, brothers and both Acura development engineers, were doing ride-alongs during the event. I jumped at the chance, and Peter was kind enough to let me sucker some cameras in the car to show you what that looked like. Now, obviously, it's unrealistic to take what a championship-caliber Pikes Peak record-holding driver can do with a bleeding-edge electrified supercar and just replicate it. If I could do that, my driving resume, I assure you, would be quite a bit thicker than it is. I could, however, in reality, observe, interpret, and experiment in an effort to approximate some of what I experienced with my own talent and vehicle. This translated into another 0.7 of a second gained, and a personal best lap for the event in my following session. Here is that lap in its entirety. 126.0 means that I not only eclipsed my virtual self by some margin, but I also managed to meet or exceed my pro in a similar car reference lap. Does this mean I'm quicker than Mike Skeen, though? Not in the slightest. I'm driving my own car at 8.5 or 9 tenths, and he's probably driving a student's car he's not familiar with at about 7 tenths just to show someone the line. Claiming anything from that comparison would be the ultimate Ricer flyby of bench racing. All it really does is provide me some reassurance that I was doing things approximately correctly by the end of the event. And that's really all I ask. Bringing things full circuit then, what have we accomplished in this video? Well, we've used a bunch of disparate learning techniques to get better at a racetrack. That's basically the really short version. We started out learning Summit Point by watching video. We then took what we learned in the video and applied that to driving it in a sim. We took our virtual learnings and then ported those over to reality and kind of validated them in a warm-up session, treating that as kind of the reality filter from what we did online. Once we had that, we were then able to take, here's where I'll speculate a little bit. We came out of the box in our first real session at Summit Point at a high minute 28-second range. And this is just purely for improvement, to show improvement, not talking about that being anything special. So we came out of the box at a high minute 28-second lap. I'm going to speculate that that would have taken me probably 2 full sessions in addition to the warm-up to get to that point had I just come in blind. Having not even seen a map of the track or watched any video or anything. I'm a pretty quick study. Summit Point is not a very long or technical circuit as far as having a big number of turns anyway. So that will be exacerbated though. That sort of learning deficit will be exacerbated on a longer or more technical track. We were able to come out of the box at that point and then improve from there, using those extra sessions we gained back to then, find people that were doing things better than we were and follow them around and make observations and then, ride with Peter Cunningham, who's obviously far more experienced and skilled than I am, and pick up a thing or two there to then, result at the end of the day was a nearly 3-second improvement in what I'll call my 8.5 to 9 tenths, effort, comfortably fast lap time. And that's significant. As you get more and more experienced, and more skilled, the lap time gains get less and less and less over time. If I went back to a track that I've driven a whole bunch, say Carolina Motorsports Park, I bet I would probably not be able to improve my time there by even a single second, and I would be pleased if I did. I would be out of my head if I did more than a second of improvement there. But, all that is to say that I think these techniques do work. I have a strong feeling that they work. I'm going to continue to use them where I possibly can. I think the caveat is with any measurable amount of intelligently used seat time, just you driving and circulating a track as an experienced driver and knowing what you're doing, you're going to inevitably see some improvement from new track to I've driven this track for 2 days. But I think using the pre-learning techniques and then as well as using, intelligently using the time that you're on the track and taking advantage of opportunities like riding with someone who's quicker than you, I think that definitely speeds up the learning curve significantly. That said, I'm sure I've missed things. So if there's a technique that I haven't talked about, I know one in particular would be just having someone ride with you. You have a local driver or instructor that may have some sort of inside knowledge to, maybe you want to stay off the apex at this particular turn because there's a big bump there. If you didn't know that, you'd have just been going over it being like, wow, the track's bumpy and I can't really carry speed through that because they're like, yeah, but if you stay off the apex, it's that kind of thing you get from just talking to people. And or having someone more experienced at that particular track ride around with you is one thing. But I'm sure there are plenty of others. If you think of something in particular, by all means, leave a comment down below. I think learning something new is always, it's the fun part. It's one of the fun parts of the hobby. And, that's kind of always the thing. 12 years in, I'm still learning something new every day. and I hope I don't stop learning anytime soon. But anyway, I appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate all the support. If you do want to support, by the way, Lap of the World more directly, I do have a Patreon page now. I'll link to that in the description below. But for today, I think that's where we're going to call it. That has been a number of techniques and methods that I try and use to learn tracks more quickly. And I hope you've gotten something out of it, or at least been entertained. So, with that said, we're calling it there. I'm Richard, this is Lap of the World, and we will see you guys in the next video, if not at the track.